Hey, how's it going guys, Chris here, and Battlefield 1's final DLC, which is the Apocalypse DLC, is on its way and should be arriving pretty soon. There's been quite a lot of new information released on it recently, including what those new weapons are going to be, and apparently we're going to be getting 6 new guns, or 9 unique variants, whichever way you want to look at it. 2 variants of the CSRG for the Assault class, 2 variants of the Howell rifle for the Medic class, 2 variants of the LMG 0818 for the Support, 2 different rifles for the Scout class, the 1917 Enfield and the Ross Mark III, and last of all, a brand new all-kit revolver, simply just named the Revolver Mark VI. Now I managed to try out all of these weapons in the CTE not too long ago, as you can see in the background. And I thought it would be a good idea to just give you guys a bit of a heads up on these weapons regarding what they actually are and how they fit into the game, and just my general first impressions on using them in the CTE. Of course, you've got to remember that this is all still quite early in development, hence why I'm playing in a white box testing environment, so some things might and probably will change a bit in the final build. Plus I only really got to play with these weapons for a limited time, just a couple of hours or so, which means that I've not actually managed to form any solid opinions on them yet. But this is just my basic thoughts and a bit of information on the 6 new guns that we're going to be seeing in Battlefield 1's Apocalypse DLC fairly soon. So I'm going to kick this list off with the Assault Class's CSRG, aka the Shosho Ribeirau's 1918 submachine gun. It's a fully automatic French weapon, chambered for the 8mm Labelle cartridge, holding a total of 9 rounds at most, which isn't really very much when compared to the other Assault SMGs. There's 2 different variants of the CSRG, including the Factory and the Optical, which I'm going to presume are both going to play out like all of the other Factory and Optical variants, with the Factory having a lower recoil decrease and probably a smaller first shot recoil multiplier, and the Optical having a mid-range scope along with those lower ADS spread bonuses. Now the first thing I noticed about the CSRG is that it seemed to kick like a mule, making it pretty hard to stay on target. So I'm guessing it's going to have some fairly high recoil values, and this made it seem a lot harder to use beyond close range. Hipfire accuracy felt quite manageable considering, and tap and burst firing seemed to be quite effective up close, but it didn't really seem to be super effective against players further away. So I'm guessing it's got a lot of vertical recoil, and probably a fairly high first shot multiplier to go with it. Though the gun did take enemies down really quickly in CQC, dealing a pretty high amount of damage per bullet up close. Its rate of fire was quite slow, probably to offset the fact that it dealt a lot of damage at closer ranges, and because its magazine capacity was so small, I found that it was actually quite hard to take on several opponents at a time, as you usually only had enough bullets to take care of 1 or maybe 2 enemies before reloading, which also seemed to take quite a long time to do. This meant that it could do really well in one-on-one battles, but not so much when surrounded by enemy players. And the best way I found to use the gun was just by popping in and out of cover to survive, and reloading in between kills just to be sure. Though I did have to resort to my sidearm quite a lot, especially when I tried to kill a second enemy within 1 magazine, but just didn't have enough bullets left over to do so. I wasn't really a massive fan of the CSRG, if I'm going to be totally honest, and it was probably one of my least used weapons in the CTE session. Though it's still early days and my opinions will probably change over time, the more I get to use it, and when I get hold of those very useful stats. So up next is the Howell rifle for the Medic class, and this was definitely one of the most popular guns in the session, as it often seemed like everybody was using this thing. It was basically a semi-automatic conversion of the Lee Enfield, so it was a British gun that fired the 303 British round, and it had an ammo capacity of up to 21 bullets, which is quite a lot for a Medic rifle in Battlefield 1. There was 2 variants of the Howell rifle, with those being the Factory and Marksman, and the Factory variant had some of the funniest iron sights I've ever seen in a Battlefield game, as its standard iron sights is literally just a strip of metal sticking out of the left side of the gun. The first thing I noticed about the rifle is that it felt really similar to use as the Farquhar Hill introduced in the Turning Tides DLC, as it seemed to fire at the same rate of 257 RPM, it had a similar ammo capacity, dealt the same solid damage, and even felt like it kicked around in a similar kind of way to the Farquhar Hill too. The stats are probably a bit different, but it did feel almost identical at times, and I've got a feeling that if you enjoy using the Farquhar Hill, then this is probably going to be a good weapon for you. Magazine reloads felt quite snappy, so it was a pretty good gun for getting you back into the fight quickly after running out of shots, though the recoil did feel very erratic at times, especially when using that Marksman variant with a higher magnification setting. Though it was still manageable, but perhaps a little bit less spammy than the Factory variants, as the bouncy nature of the recoil meant that I had to fire a bit slower to counter the kick when taking on longer range targets. Though we did have a bipod to help with this, which was a pretty handy thing to have in a few of those longer distance fights. Overall it was a fun and pretty useful weapon to use, and it seemed to do quite well in a lot of close, medium and long range situations. As for the new support gun, we're going to be getting our hands on the LMG 0818, a close relative to the Sentry's 0815 already in the game. It was basically a newer, air-cooled model, and in traditional LMG fashion, the gun has a pretty big ammo capacity. There were two variants of the LMG 0818 on offer, with these being the standard low-weight variant along with a suppressive variant, which had a telescopic scope plus holding twice as much ammo, and both variants had bipods for steadier fire over longer ranges. Now, this gun was an absolute wrecking machine in the CTE, as it seemed to kill really quickly, having a similar kind of fire rate to the BAR. Because it could hold up to 100 rounds, this also meant that it could take on a lot more people than the BAR, and perform quite well against multiple players, in situations where you're surrounded by the enemy team. It did overheat after firing 35 shots, so it wasn't exactly the best weapon for shooting in long continuous streams, but it was still a very effective machine gun for bringing people and planes down by firing in long bursts. Just like the other LMGs, which hold a lot of ammunition, the LMG 0818 also unsurprisingly seemed to have a fairly long reload time, which isn't exactly a huge problem, so long as you keep an eye out on your bullet counter and seek out cover whenever you need to top the gun up with more rounds. Just like the Howell rifle, this also seemed to be an extremely popular weapon in the CTE session, probably down to just how bloody powerful it was. And I wouldn't be extremely surprised to see some slight nerfs to the weapon in the final build, with it seeming a bit too effective at times in quite a lot of gunfights, as the recoil didn't really kick around very much considering the fact that the gun fired at 600 RPM. Though it was certainly one of the most fun weapons out of the pack, and should be a good one to keep an eye on when the DLC finally hits. Now, there's two different scout weapons that we're going to be able to get our hands on in the DLC, and these are the Ross Mark III and the 1917 Enfield, which are both going to play out quite differently to each other. Starting off with the Ross Mark III, this was a Canadian rifle which, funnily enough, was the basis of the Hewitt automatic, which was in fact adapted from the Ross rifle. It was a straight pull bolt action rifle chambered for the .303 British round, and the Mark III variants were made in 1910 and used by Canadian snipers during the war. As far as we know, there's only going to be one variant of the Ross Mark III in the Apocalypse DLC, which is the Marksman variant, so it's going to have a mid-range telescopic sight, giving you a clear view of targets in the distance without emitting any scope glare. As far as the damage and sweet spot zones are concerned, the Ross rifle seems to hit harder at medium ranges up to about 75 meters, and because it uses the same round as the SMLE Mark III, I'm guessing that it's going to have a pretty similar damage model, with its one-hit kill zone set at the same sort of distance. The gun holds a standard 5 rounds, which are loaded individually or via stripper clips, and as far as I'm aware, the rifle didn't seem to have any sort of dynamic reload, like we've been seeing with a lot of the weapons that have come out in the past few DLCs. Fire rate seemed to be quicker than average, as the info card said that the gun fires at 62 RPM. But of course, this might not be correct, as some of the info cards for the different weapons seem to display the wrong stats, with it only being a work in progress. But I'm presuming that it'll have a fairly fast fire rate in the final build, and it seems to be a pretty basic marksman rifle on the face of it. The 1917 Enfield, also coming to the Scout class, was an American modification of the British P14 Enfield, and it used the 30-06 Springfield cartridge and could hold up to a total of 6 rounds within its internal magazine. There's only one variant of the Enfield, with that being the infantry, so you'll have to get used to its iron sights, as there isn't any optics available for this one. And the interesting thing to point out about the 1917 Enfield is the fact that even though it's an infantry variant, because it fires the Springfield cartridge, it's going to have a fairly similar damage model to the M1903, meaning it'll be more effective against longer range targets instead of people nearby. I guess this could be seen as DICE's answer to an infantry variant for the M1903, as I know a lot of people want an infantry variant of that gun, and even though it's not exactly the same weapon, it'll still probably function in a similar sort of way. The muzzle velocity seemed pretty fast, which is always a good trait for a longer range weapon to have, and because it could hold up to 6 bullets, this gives you a higher amount than average to use, which is also quite nice. And unlike the Ross rifle, the Enfield did have a dynamic reload, allowing for a faster 5-bullet reload by simply sliding in a new clip. Rate of fire also seemed to be quite fast, which means that it could also be effective at closer ranges too, though I will have to say that I wasn't exactly a massive fan of the iron sights, which seemed to be a bit obstructive at times, especially when you're trying to find a long-range target to take advantage of that higher range damage. But they were still usable nevertheless, and still usually did the job okay enough. Now, the last weapon in the list is the British Webley Mark VI revolver, which was introduced into military service by 1915. It's a break-action revolver, meaning that, like the auto revolver, you'll be able to open the top and quickly load another 6 rounds back into the gun without having to fiddle around with loading gates or individual bullets. It seemed a little bit jumpy, but still very manageable up close if you shoot slower and line up shots properly, and although it didn't seem to deal as much damage over range as the Bodeo 1889 or the Gasser, it still seemed to be okay for finishing players off. Up close, it functioned in a very similar way to the other revolvers, killing enemies with full health in just 2 shots, and its deploy time didn't really seem to take too long, especially when compared to some of the other revolvers which often seem to take forever to switch over to. It felt very similar to the Medic's auto revolver in a lot of ways, which isn't a very big surprise with them both being Webley revolvers, and so they're probably going to be quite similar statistically, though it looks like the Mark VI is probably going to be an all Kit Sidearm, so unlike the auto revolver, it's probably not going to be tied down to a specific class. Seemed like a pretty fun and effective gun to use up close, and it could even potentially be one of the best revolvers in the game, but I guess we'll find that out soon. So that's basically all of the weapons coming in the Apocalypse DLC. It's possible but unlikely that more will be introduced further down the line for the DLC, and it's very important to know that not everything I've said in this video will be the way it is when the DLC finally hits. It's all in testing at the moment, and some things probably will change a bit as time goes on, so just bear this in mind. But as of right now, these guns will probably work in a similar kind of way when they're released, and I'll be working on a whole bunch of proper in-depth guides for all of them as soon as they are. Anyway, hope the video was useful for you. If it was, give me a thumbs up, and subscribe to check out tons of already existing weapon guides, along with reviews for all of the ones I've just mentioned in this video at some point in the future. Take it easy, and I'll see you in our next episode.